for week 2. Thank you for coming. We have ground rules which you heard last time, and I'm going to repeat them so everybody can hear them. Be recognized before speaking. And during this session, please wait till the speakers have completely finished before asking questions. Make concise statements, engage in active listening, and be respectful. And I know you all were fabulous last week, and we thank you for that. So this week we're having city government and city engagement, how city government works, guiding principles and vision, and the 3 branches of government. And we are going to go around again like we did last week, but we're going to do it a little bit differently this time. So we're going to state your name, what your neighborhood council is, and say something nice about your neighborhood that you like. So I'm Jane Kelly, I'm the neighborhood coordinator, and I've worked for the city of Missoula for 15 years.
I'm John Egan, I'm the mayor of Missoula. I worked for the city for some period of time now, it's hard to remember. I live about 4 blocks from the house I grew up on South 2nd Street, and it's a lovely neighborhood, close to the good food store. And while I avoid kale, I like the rest of the stuff they have.
I'm Brian Von Lossberg. I've been on city council for 5 years now. I live in the north side, right across from Whittier School, the Head Start School. And one of the many things I love about that neighborhood is the fact that we have the community cinema up on the side of the school in the park there every Saturday night during the summer.
I'm Sarah Rinfrey. I direct the Masters of Public Administration program at the University of Montana. I live on the west side, north side. So I like it because I get to walk. Yeah, because we get to walk to Burn Street Bistro. Yeah.
I'm Kathleen Jenks. I am the municipal court judge, and I want to talk about downtown Missoula instead of where I live, because that's where I spend most of my time at work. And I love downtown Missoula because it's so accessible and it's just a lovely downtown.
Dale?
Well, I'm Dale Rickle. I'm the city's chief administrative officer. I've been with the city for about 5 years. Prior to that, I was the chief administrative officer and chief financial officer for Missoula County for 14 years. I live over by the Dairy Queen off Higgins, and I love walking there with my kids on the summer night.
Thank you. Let's start over here.
I'm Sierra Farmer. I live on the north side, west side, and I said this last week, but it's the good hood. And I also am living a few blocks away from where I grew up, and I could go on and on about why it's the best neighborhood in Missoula. We have a great brewery, we have a great school, but I don't want to bore you guys.
Jeff?
I'm Jeff Berkby, and I live on East Sussex Avenue in the University District for about 12 years. And I moved there specifically. I moved here because I like the mix of the 5,000 students on campus and the vibrancy and the homes in the university area are stuff full of renters. The change in the spring and change in the fall, you get this really flow of different dynamics in the area. So it's really interesting to see that growth and difference.
Bryce, we're not going to skip you.
I'm not a copyright spot. Howdy, my name is Bryce. I live in the University District on 5th Street. I've been in Missoula for 6 years now. I graduated from the university. Love my time here and love Missoula.
Randy?
Hi, my name is Brandy Soulars, and I live right across from Greeno Park. One of my favorite parts is introducing people to the bear cage in Greeno Park. It's the house that my grandma grew up in, and it's been there for a long time, so it's a very historical spot, and I love showing the house.
Thank you.
I'm Danny. I am also in the Lower Rattlesnake, and I just also love Greeno Park and being on soccer.
Great.
I'm Erin Muzo, born and raised in Missoula. I was raised in the South Hills in the Waukee area. As an adult, though, I've lived in more rural areas, Tura being one of those areas. Now I live in Grant Creek, and why I love Grant Creek is it's the perfect combination of rural and urban.
Thank you.
She totally took what I was going to say. I'm Jared Keene, also born and raised in Missoula, also grew up on the south side of town in the South Hills. Live in the Grant Creek neighborhood, and that's my favorite part of Grant Creek because it's close to nature and easily accessible to downtown and Snowball and everything that Missoula has going for it.
Thank you.
My name is Christine Littig. I live in the Riverfront neighborhood. I also grew up in Missoula, and I'm a fourth generation Missoulian Montanan. I have lived in a lot of the neighborhoods in Missoula, almost all of them. But I do currently love the neighborhood I'm living in the most, and I believe that's because I can walk almost anywhere in 5 minutes and or hop in my car and be in Grant Creek in 5 minutes.
Andy?
I'm Andy Armstrong, rubbing elbows with a fellow riverfront area person. So I have to credit this to Christine, but I liked how she called it perfectly located. I definitely agree. If I have tickets to a show at the Wilma, I can just walk down and walk home. And also, I was chatting earlier about how my home is a time capsule. I recently found newspapers from 1923 with ads for the Wilma and all kinds of crazy articles in it stuffed in the walls of our house. So it's pretty cool.
Thank you.
I'm Cindy Sandow, and I too have lived in Missoula most of my life and have lived all over town in different neighborhoods, currently in Miller Creek. And I think my favorite part really up there right now is that most of us have been there since before we had kids, and we've met each other through our kids, and there's a really great group of people that are real close.
Thank you.
I'm Alex Frigario, lived in Missoula 14 years, and I'm in Miller Creek as well. And one of my favorite parts about Miller Creek is the Miller Creek Cafe at the Linda Vista Golf Course there. They have great burgers.
Dwight Easton. I've lived in Missoula 26 years. Linda Vista Boulevard didn't go much beyond my house when I first moved out there, so I've seen it grow. It's been a great place to raise kids.
Nice.
Elena Hardy, Lewis and Clark. I have been in Missoula for 13 months. My favorite thing about Lewis and Clark, drum coffee, fenced dog park, soccer fields, water park.
Nice.
I'm Jess Allred, and I'm also in Lewis and Clark. And my kid will get to walk to school his entire school career. We're really close to Lewis and Clark and Washington and Sentinel as well.
Great. How are you?
I'm Colleen Baldwin. I live at Canyon Creek. We're in the Grant Creek. We are the newest neighborhood in Missoula. And the thing I enjoy most is, for one thing, it is one of the few areas that was hopefully deliberately built to have aging in place. You have your facilities, your bedroom, kitchen all on one floor, as well as whatever else you may have. That's the central plan out there. So there are many of us choosing to live as we age out there, plus a lot of families. It's very nice. We really enjoy the neighborhood.
Thank you.
My name's Meg Witcher. I've now lived in Missoula longer than I've lived anywhere in my life, 5 years, so it's about as home as it gets for me. I live north side, just a couple blocks down from Ollie's on 3rd. And I love the north side because I feel like it's easily defendable in case there was a war, because we have, there's one way into the north side and there's one way out, and it's Scott Street Bridge, and the interstate and railroad tracks blocks everything, so like, both sides. And yeah.
I'm Kylie Gilberman. I hope Meg lets me over the bridge at the end times, but I live on the west side, north side, west side. And I think my favorite thing about it is that we are a under 10-minute hike bike to open space, to restaurants, to breweries. Last night walking my dog, every single person I met said hi, wanted to pet them, so it's just a really great place.
Fabulous. Topper?
Topper Lenhair and Franklin to the Fort, and we were talking about some of the redevelopment with parks and schools in our neighborhood.
Thank you.
I'm Sarah Ferguson, and I am also in the Franklin to Fort area. And I guess what I really love is Franklin Park and being also near the school, and just witnessing kind of the
the change and the kind of heartbeat you can feel in the neighborhood.
Hi, I'm Megan Robson, also from Franklin to the Fort. You're going to hear a lot about Franklin to the Fort, I guess, for the people around here. And I'm from Billings originally, so I'm just going to put this out to everybody. Your neighborhoods are all better than Billings. And so, there's not a bad choice in Missoula, right? But I love our neighborhood because I have some of the nicest neighbors on the planet.
Thank you. Larry?
I'm Larry Cron. I live on 34th Street in Triangle neighborhood. It's a neighborhood of a lot of retirees in modest rancher-type homes, but also a lot of low-income housing and a lot of variety and such. I live in my parents' house that I inherited. They bought it in 1964 new.
Thank you. Chris?
I'm Chris Kushel. I'm representing Farview's Patty Canyon. I live in the house that my family bought in the early 60s. It was built in 58. My neighborhood, at least my street, is, there's not much turnover. A lot of the neighbors that I know of have been there since, 35 years, and they're not going anywhere soon. We're slowly starting to see some turnover as people age out. And I guess my favorite part is, yes, it's close to downtown, but if I don't want to go downtown, it's very nostalgic. I can stay home and be Betty Crocker, or go for a walk, or just enjoy the view.
Thank you.
I'm Carol Meeper. I live out in the Captain John Mullen neighborhood, and what I like about it, I'm further out, and I like the ruralness and the open space out there. I have great neighbors. I really appreciate the diversity in my neighborhood council. We have a lot of low income and wealthy with a big spread in between. And I think that adds to the complexity of the neighborhood, but also the diversity and people helping one another.
Shane Stack, Franklin to the Fort. A few things that I like about the neighborhood. Benson's Farm, even though it's in the county, I still can go across the street and grab some fresh vegetables. I think it's an awesome amenity. We are really centrally located in the community, so I can pretty much go from my front door, I can get on my bike, or I can go for a run. I can get into the mountains really quick, or I can get down to the Bitterroot, down to Hamilton if I want. And those trails and those types of things are right outside my front door.
Thank you. Nick?
Nick Jones, River Road. Things I like about my neighborhood are it's basically all cul-de-sacs, so there's not a lot of traffic. So the kids can play on the street, you don't have to worry about anybody racing through, which is nice. We also have River Road Farm, which is from Garden City Organics, so that's a cool addition. I think it's up and coming, lots of things are changing in our neighborhood right now, which is cool.
Blaine Fury. I'm west side part of north side, west side. And I love that our neighborhood is funky. I think that's as a result of no HOAs, which I love. And because of reasons Meg's brought up, no deer either.
I'm Caitlin, I live downtown, and I like that our neighborhood leadership council is all women.
The only one.
The only one.
I'm Nancy DeCastino, Upper Rattlesnake. I love the incredible access through trails and open space, and that we're 5 minutes from downtown unless you run into the train.
Ricky?
I'm Ricky Blue. I live in Rose Park. I really like it. It's a quiet, family-oriented neighborhood, but it's also 5 minutes from downtown, and I'm a block away from Big Dip.
I'm Casey Erickson. I'm also in Rose Park. Also lucky, like so many of us, that we can walk to downtown, the university, anywhere. It's great.
Thank you. Brett?
I'm Brett Rosenberg. I live in Upper Rattlesnake, and one of my favorite things about Upper Rattlesnake is the great diversity in interpretations of leash laws.
Sure, I'm Tim DeFors. I live in the Marshall Canyon neighborhood, which is the one past East Missoula, if you've never been out there. But it's a newish neighborhood, and what I like about it is everyone's new to the neighborhood. It's so new, and houses are still being built out there.
Well, I think everybody likes Missoula, so let's hear it for Missoula. Thank you. Karen has a couple of announcements to make, and then we'll continue on.
So I have a couple updates for you with your binders. I've put 2 pages, just blank pages, that you can use for notes in the very back of your binders. And also, please note on the schedules, next session will be at the Fire Department Station 4, and that's at 311 Lattimore Street. And those are new schedules that have been put in there. So if you're looking at your old ones, look for the 3011 Lattimore Street on your schedule. That's where we will be meeting next week.
Where is Lattimore?
Where is Lattimore? Out past West Broadway.
It's kind of like the old Quality Supply, Murdoch's. It's right on the street next to Murdoch's.
And one more thing, we've been talking about the MCAT, that they'll be providing these sessions, and you will be able to start watching those February 4th, will be last week's session, on February 4th at 5 p.m., and then Thursday, February 7th at 10 o'clock a.m. And they'll also be on there on demand, and that's channel 190. And then the next week, that following Monday, February 11th, will be tonight's, and that'll be at 5 o'clock p.m. And Thursday, February 14th, will be at 10 o'clock a.m., and we'll just kind of continue on that schedule. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email. And there also have been inquiries about the PowerPoints, and we will be sending you those through the emails as well. Thanks.
All right, one other very important thing before we go turn it over. Last week I said that we were going to go next door and have a drink after this. I just want to let everybody know we are on for that following.
I don't have the hidden agenda, so. Shall I?
Yeah. Yes. Mr. Mayor, it's yours.
Thank you so much. So it's really unusual to be in this room and hear what a wonderful place Missoula is to live. Typically on Monday evenings, we get a little bit of a contrast around that. So it's pretty wonderful to hear how much you all enjoy it. You know, I hope what you take from these sessions is that a lot of what you enjoy isn't an accident. It's actually more or less deliberate, and it is a product of you, right? Local government is a product of the people, and my firm belief is that there is no level of government that is more important, more accessible, and provides more opportunity for citizens and public servants to interact. So some of that happens in this room, but for me it happens everywhere. Whether I'm at the grocery store, in the waiting room of the doctor's office, at City Hall, in a park, wherever I go, I am accountable to the people I serve. I live with the people I serve, and I enjoy the benefits of decisions that are made in and around this building, and I also suffer the consequences, as it were. And the beauty is that when you all get tired of me or any of my colleagues, you get to send me packing. You get to replace me with somebody whose values more align with yours, and that's the beauty of the place and the beauty of the system. I have to represent the executive branch of local government, which is the place I love to be. I served as a city council member for 4 years. It was delightful service. Those folks worked too hard, so I tried to find another job in city government where I didn't have to do nearly as much, but got more credit. And sure enough, if you run for mayor and get elected, this is what you get. So I am required by our charter to do two things. One is deliver a budget to the Missoula City Council, and the other is to preside over council meetings, and the rest of my time is free. But my predecessors and anyone who takes this job, anyone who begs for this job, anyone who respects the job recognizes that there is much more to this job than those two things. I'm responsible on a daily basis for all of the souls who work for the city of Missoula, and they range from people who carry guns to people who teach little kids how to swim to people who pound on chests to make sure that someone's life goes on another day, to folks who make sure that sewer pipes run clear and now that water pipes run freely. And it is a tremendous responsibility, it is a tremendous privilege, and it's a tremendous joy. It also comes with moments of heartbreak. But all in, I get to make choices with all of you about the way this community operates, looks, feels over time, and it is a pure joy. On a daily basis, what I'm responsible for is making sure that the wheels generally stay on the wagon. And while I'm responsible for that and accountable for it, I don't do it all. So our branch of government is really about the nuts and bolts of running a city. And I have a team of folks at the management level and a team of folks who are on the front lines of delivering those services every day. And again, I'm responsible for and accountable to them. And we have a great team here at the City of Missoula, and over time I hope you get to meet more of those folks who are doing that work. I get to do the administrative stuff, right? I execute the policies that the City Council approves. I listen to you and help develop those policies. And in some cases, I either lead by leading or I lead by following. And so in some cases, folks can come to this room, express their opinions, and drive us to action. That is the beauty of local government. I'll give you a quick example. Our friends on the west side, north side, you really need to make a choice at some point, but we'll go with west side, north side for our purposes. Meg, I'm sorry about the potential for the zombie apocalypse. I'm glad you're prepared, however. We had a group of neighbors from the west side come see us en masse on a Monday evening and said, we are uncomfortable in our neighborhood. We're worried about crime, we're worried about safety, we're worried about lighting, we're worried about our children. And from that expression of those concerns on one Monday evening here, the City of Missoula collectively sprang into action. And whether it's the elected representatives who serve the ward, me or my staff, we're all meeting now regularly with neighbors to address those issues. And that's a function of folks having the faith and trust in government to be sincere in our response. It ain't perfect, it's slow, in some cases it's expensive, in some cases the product is doesn't meet expectations, but the fact of the matter is that that citizens can make a difference in the way this government operates and the way our city provides services. And I see those examples again and again. We do, in addition to my responsibilities here on Monday evenings, I'm responsible for what the legislative branch of government does. So while I preside over council meetings, the power of policy and the power of the checkbook lives with the Missoula City Council, those 12 folks. And I generally, with a few notable exceptions, and those exceptions ebb and flow with elections, we're generally sitting around this table trying to solve problems and do our best to serve the people we swore that we would take care of. The executive branch also does the financial stuff. We do the legal stuff. And we interact as comfortably as we can with the judicial branch. Judge James is here this evening. And while it turns out I signed her paycheck, he acknowledges that in absolutely no way. So we do have these distinct branches of government, much like the federal government, but at this level, I think we work together a little better than some of the examples that we're seeing, certainly on the federal level and in some cases on the state level. I am very interested in answering your questions when the time comes. I will stop so that others can talk. That's the executive branch, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello. First rule, never follow the mayor in a speaking activity. So you literally had one slide that just said executive branch. I like that. that is true power. So I'm Brian von Lossberg, city council member. There's only 2 of us on city council actually who are in a second term, which is a little bit unusual for recent terms. Jordan Hess, for those of you who are in Ward 2, is one of those folks, and then myself, and I represent Ward 1. Rattlesnake, great to see folks from Rattlesnake here. North Side, I was going to make a crack about the North Side, West Side thing. I get that they're in the same neighborhood council thing, but as a North Sider, across the tracks, it's nice to hear the West Side folks refer to it as North Side, West Side. I really love that. I get to go home tonight to my 6-year-old first grader at Lowell and simply say that I was in a room with Meg Witcher, and she will find that extremely excited. She does a lot of parks programs with Meg, and Meg is like one of the most amazing resources for the city. So thanks for being here. And I would mention some folks I didn't mention. Oh, I'm supposed to be behind this. That felt very close. River Road Farm. My wife is Genevieve Marsh. If any of you work with Garden City Harvest at all or have a CSA, you might encounter her. She's the more lovely and good person in our couple. I will use these as some prompts. I'm guessing, Jane, that the first thing that happened was that you introduced these folks to the charter. So I will spend little time going over it other than to say, the mayor referenced it. It's critical, hugely important. A couple of things that I would note from it are, this is where we get the empowerment for the council. A lot of this is, I'll kind of try to go through the dry stuff pretty quickly, and then there were some great prompts from Jane, and I think Gwen and Heather that I'll go to make it less dry. But this is where, we've got 6 wards in the city. I'm guessing everyone here knows which ward they're. Does anyone not know what ward they're with? Okay, that's actually pretty rare when I encounter people in Missoula. 12 members, 2 in each ward on staggered 4-year terms. I get the pleasure of serving with Heidi West, is my colleague for Ward 1, and this is these are the folks. And as the mayor mentioned, we're the legislative branch, we're the policymaking branch, and I think it's worth reflecting on. Policy comes from a variety of places. Sometimes it comes from the executive branch. Sometimes it comes from a council member or a group of council members with an idea or a passion. And oftentimes it comes from constituents. And I've had a couple cases serving on council, and they've been among the most rewarding, difficult, challenging, hard processes and opportunities being on council to actually carry legislation all the way through from an idea to ordinance, and 2 of those came from constituents in the Rattlesnake, actually. So, and I'm really, that's been one of the most rewarding aspects of council, is listening to people who have an idea, make a case for why it should be implemented, and then you work alongside those folks to make that happen. Let's see. Don't expect to be able to read all this, and I think you don't have these now, but you're going to get these slides in a package. But worth knowing that the down in the weeds business that we do mostly happens on Wednesdays. Monday nights are obviously the official council meetings, but our committee meeting days are Wednesdays, subject to our rules. And these are the committees that make up the various areas where we do our work. There's Administration and Finance. Heather chairs that committee. Committee of the Whole and Budget Committee of the Whole. I chair as, I serve as City Council President right now. Really honored to work with Gwen as Vice President. So I chair those Committee of the Whole meetings. So when you hear people talk about cow and beat cow, we're talking about those, not actual cows. Parks and Conservation, Gwen chairs. I used to chair Parks when I first got on council, and a point of levity perhaps, when I first got on council, I remember being absolutely terrified of coming in here on a Wednesday, and because there's this process, and it's a very deliberate process with public comment on motions and at different times. And when I first got on, another colleague was chairing Parks, and I offered to serve as the vice chair. Caitlin Koppel was the one, and Caitlin left, and so I took over chairing the Parks Committee. And I can tell you, actually before she left, but the first time I was going to chair a meeting, I watched like several videotapes of committee meetings to make sure I was going to get the process down. And it's kind of funny to think about now, because it's really not that big a deal, and there's a whole bunch of people who are going to help you work it out. But for anyone who feels slightly nervous or intimidated about ever coming and making public comment on a Monday night or at a committee meeting, please know that people are terrified sitting behind the seats as well. I, in a former life, used to build spaceships for the Jet Propulsion Lab, a part of NASA. I worked with a great team to put, if you saw the movie The Martian, my team built part of what landed on Mars, and I think I'm more terrified in the beginning of making sure I ran a public meeting properly than failing at getting this thing on the surface of Mars. Land use and planning is, I think, really one of the hardest committees to chair, and it's among the most important work we do. This is land use decisions that affect, they make up the city, whether it's subdivisions or town exemption development projects, or any number of zoning related sort of things. That work is in LUP. I think the mayor used to chair a former, they called it PAZ. John Navari from Ward 4 chairs that committee. John had a lot of experience on planning board, and it's made him really well suited to chairing that committee. Public Works, we have a water utility to run now that we've been doing for a while, along with sewer and other infrastructure. That action happens in Public Works. Jordan Hess from Ward 2 chairs that. And then Public Safety and Health, and Michelle Karras checks those committees. So that's where, when we're proposing, when an ordinance or policy comes forward, first we take it up in committee, and then eventually it might make it out of committee and up to a public hearing at a council meeting on a Monday night. It often gets sent back to committee for more work. So it's a long process. It's a deliberative process. It can be frustrating with how sort of long and deliberative it is, and deliberate. But there's a reason for that. When we make policy decisions, they should be well considered and thought out. And one of the things I enjoy about council and this community is that this community and the council and the administration are willing to have difficult conversations. This is a community that embraces tough, controversial issues. Right before I got on council, the city passed its non-discrimination ordinance, marathon, public hearings. But I'm proud of Missoula for taking up issues like that, wrestling with them, getting the public involved, and then moving forward. Apparently I can't work the buttons. I will not read this other than to mention it is worth noting that by virtue of our charter, we are a city with self-government powers, and it gets easy to get down in the weeds and it gets wonky. But there are only some cities in the state that have charters that are then granted self-government powers, and it's a big deal. And once you get the slide in your package, I'd encourage you to read through it. I took a bunch of the bullet points from a notable case that delineated the difference between cities with and without self-government powers, and then sort of the history back owing to our constitution, our state constitution most recently, of how things were before and how they are now. But it's an important thing to be aware of. I think that's it on slides. I just wanted to touch on a couple of the prompts that I think Jane had left us with. And I guess somewhat similar to the experience being terrified about how to run a public meeting. One of the first things I got to do on council representing the north side was write a resolution about the White Pine Sash site. So you might be familiar with the White Pine Sash Superfund, state Superfund site over in the north side. And long story short, DEQ had developed a plan for this polluted area, but the plan, when it first came out, really was pretty insulting to the neighborhood, to put it bluntly, and didn't envision any kind of residential potential in that area. And it was pretty distressing to sort of read DEQ's and some lawyers' characterization of the north side. And they kind of depict it as this sort of commercial wasteland. And a lot of my neighbors and myself felt that was an inaccurate portrayal of the potential in that area. And so I conferred with one of my colleagues, Jason Weiner, who at the time was my Ward 1 colleague, and I had this idea, I think it actually came from a constituent, to write a resolution expressing, the reasons why we should ask DEQ to revisit that plan and actually clean up that site to residential standards instead of cleaning it up to only commercial standards. And when I talked to Jason, I kind of said, well, so where do we go? Like, how does resolution get written? Is there some sort of special resolution writer, mysteriously on staff somewhere? And he's like, get your computer out and start. He's like, there's a bunch of whereases and then there's a bunch of therefores at the end, and you get to fill in the blanks. And I did, and I'm still really proud of that resolution. We did get DEQ, not just because of that resolution, but that resolution passed unanimously on council, and then led to a number of other agencies, City County Health, weighing in, and ultimately, in the end, DEQ actually came back and changed their plan. They didn't change it for all 18 acres there, but they did change it for 9 of the acres to clean up that portion residential. And if you've been over in that area, just north of that area, the old Clausen site, there's the big housing project over there. So it's a validation of the residential potential in that neighborhood, and very empowering for myself, but more importantly for the constituents that lived over there about seeing that change. And getting DEQ to change a plan felt at the beginning like a Herculean sort of task. Hardest part was a prompt, and I'm gonna throw out one thing here. I expect it to be controversial. I welcome following up with anybody for coffee or anytime afterwards. One of the hardest things for me and for some of my colleagues I know on council is social media. And I'm hearing more and more people talk about this. I have these interesting debates with my wife at Garden City Harvest because she's in charge of their social media work, and I can see the power and the goodness, if you will, of how it can be used. I've also seen it in local government, and at the same time that we're seeing some of our traditional media, print is what I'm thinking of specifically, experience total upending of their business model and cuts in their resources and staff. And I see and have come to see a much uglier side where lies and untruths get spread in a viral sort of way, and it has really made me question the value of it, to be quite blunt. It's not that I don't recognize that it can be used for good, but on balance, I'm seeing it used overwhelmingly to spread disinformation. So that's one of the hardest things. Greatest unmet need, and I'll wrap this up pretty quickly here. I'll throw out a wonky thing that you've heard some of. I expect it to be controversial, and again, I hope that maybe it's even a topic potentially later. But you've heard probably the mayor at some point and council members like myself talk about a local option tax, and more specifically, the opportunity for us to come to the community with a proposal for a local option tax or tourist tax. These are, Whitefish has one of these. We are prevented by statute from bringing this opportunity to the community and working together to formulate something that might work for the community. And if we brought you something that didn't work, it has to get voted to go in. So if we bring you something bad, I'm pretty confident the community will not vote it in. But we're reaching places with revenue, and we live in a state without a general sales tax. We also are in a state where, Montana's been discovered for quite some time now. There's not an area in the state that's not seeing a lot of tourism. Tourists are great. They also use our sidewalks, our streets, our parks, our roads. And I think pretty simply, it's not unreasonable to want to derive some revenue from those folks for that infrastructure. And if you look at what happens up at Whitefish, 25% of what they raise goes right back onto your property tax bill as a rebate. You actually see it on your property tax bill as, here's what you would have paid, here's your 25% rebate from the tax. And I hope it's something that you dive into, even if I made you really mad by bringing that up. Last two things, what makes your branch or you happy? It makes me immeasurably happy when I hear other people, whether they are friends, neighbors, talk about what they love about Missoula. And whether it's the farmer's market, whether it's breweries, whether we send our kid to community school. I think community school is one of the greatest institutions on the planet. Whatever it is that makes people love Missoula, people feel pretty passionate about this community. I love it. I love hearing how people came to Missoula, and I love hearing what it is they love about it. We do a lot of little things on council and those committees and contracts that we approve just to keep government running and functioning. The mayor, alluded to this and talked to this a bunch. And then we do some big things. And whether it is something like the non-discrimination ordinance or some of the other bigger things like the water acquisition, both of those have made me really happy. The little things and the big things. And the last thing I'll mention is I think it's interesting that in the charter's preamble, it gives us this great description of Missoula being blessed with natural beauty and the mountains and the valleys. But toward the end, it talks about being thankful for a good place to live and for the rights and responsibilities of liberty as stewards of our community. And they're not talking about any of the branches of government. It's the authors of the charter referring to themselves as the stewards of the community. And as the mayor mentioned, you have that right and that opportunity at the ballot box, but also just in the day-to-day functioning of government and the ideas that you bring to us, the criticisms that you rightfully make. It's powerful to see that embodied in the charter, and that's a great way to end. And thank you for being a part of this. Civic Missoula is not a great place just by chance. It's a great place because people work hard to make it a great place. And you folks taking time to participate in something like that, something like this, is really important. So thanks. Interesting. Oh, I didn't. That would have been much easier.
Okay, so Missoula Municipal Court is the third branch of Missoula's government, and the separation of powers, of course, is very central to the government for the United States, and it's a very important thing to know that I don't work for the mayor, and I don't work for the council. I work for the people who voted me in, and for the system itself. And those things are important. Ideally, we work with each other, and I think we do work with each other really well. That's something that is great about Missoula. When I go out and talk to judges from around the state, I hear all sorts of horror stories about how they aren't able to work with the other branches, and so I'm really grateful for that. The other thing I want to say is that I'm just so proud of Missoula tonight when I sit here and I think, not only did we get this academy started, which is awesome, but we've got this great turnout of people who are interested in Missoula, and I think that is really excellent. So I'm very pleased about that. So this is the municipal court staff, and I tell people all the time they're absolutely the best employees or staff that anyone has. And I will challenge any of you who think you have better staff than I do. But they are our staff. If you get a speeding ticket, they're the people that you're likely to be talking to first. They are the people in the court system who are the most likely to meet everybody here in the room, because we handle traffic tickets, dog tickets, things like that. We also handle more serious offenses. And so, but the fact that we handle so many offenses means that it's likely, probably, that some of you in this room have been to municipal court. You don't have to raise your hand. But we are a very large court, very high volume court. We handle, new statistics hot off the Montana Supreme Court's website, 14,599 cases a year. So that's what we did in 2018. We, up until 2018, we're the largest court in the state. Billings passed us, which, you know, I'm fine, you can have that. They can have that, that's cool. So, but it's a lot of people and it's a lot of cases, and my staff handled them beautifully and with grace. They know that people in Missoula are the ones that they're going to meet, and they love that. And even though there's another group of people that they meet, my staff gets yelled at, screamed at, sworn at, spit at. And they put that aside and they handle that with grace. But then they handle the next person who is one of you, hopefully with grace and dignity that I think they do, and they are really great. So I'm going to talk about Say it again. Okay, do not touch the bottom button. No bottom button. I want to kind of explain the courts, because when I tell people what I do, this is what they want to know, is what does municipal court do? How is that different than district court or justice court? Municipal court and justice court were called the lower courts. And justice court does cases that happen in the county, and municipal court does cases that happen in the city. Justice court also does like landlord tenant, and they do more civil stuff. So if you've got a small claims court or a small claims case that you want to file, you go to justice court, and they help you do that. Municipal court, as I said, does all of the misdemeanors that occur in Missoula. Both of our courts are below the state district court. So the state district court is the court that does all the felonies, and they do the more serious lawsuits. Yeah, don't ask me what the cutoff is, because I don't remember. It's 1,300 or 1,400, somewhere in there. Over that, it goes to district. If you are unhappy with your justice court case, after the case is tried, then you can appeal it to district court, and you'll get a whole new trial in district court, a trial from scratch. Municipal court is a court of record. So if you're unhappy with the way the case turned out in municipal court, you also appeal to district court, but in district court they just look at the record. And you have to show that there was a legal error committed by the judge in order to prevail. If you're unhappy with your district court case, then that gets appealed to the Montana Supreme Court. And very theoretically, if you're unhappy with the Montana Supreme Court, you would appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they take almost no cases ever. So it probably wouldn't happen, but that is the system and the way that it works. My court, it's myself, Kathleen Jenks. I am an assistant judge, Sam Warren, and I have a newly appointed assistant judge named Ethan Lerman, and they are the three of us. Justice court is Judge Landy Holloway. I guess I should be pointing that way. Judge Landy Holloway and Judge Alex Beal, who just left us when he was successful in his race for justice court. The district court judges are Karen Townsend, Dusty Dayshaw, John Larson, I'm blanking out on Leslie Halligan. So those are the judges in your neighborhood. So I wanted to give you this number that of, whatever it was again, 14,599. So then I thought, well, what I'd really like to tell you is a week, basically, of what we do in municipal court. During the week, is this out of order? Oh, we're still missing that one slide, aren't we? I'm missing the one that had all of the hearings delineated. I apologize for that, and I don't have those numbers with me. But during scheduled hearings, which are not the walk-ins that you would probably come in for with a speeding ticket, but most of the scheduled hearings are hearings that have the possibility of jail time, and most of them have attorneys. So during any given week, we're going to see 22 people who have been charged with partner family member assault, 10 with violation of orders of protection or stalking, 20 people who have been charged with a DUI, 7 people charged with assault, and 50 people charged with theft. So those are the cases that tend to take up the most amount of time. They have the attorneys. They have extra hearings because they have the attorneys, basically. And yeah, I do wish I had the other one. But anyway, in a week, basically, I think that what I did was I took next week and I just went through and looked at the hearings that we had scheduled. We have 31 trials scheduled for next week. So some of those will go to trial, a lot of them won't. One of the biggest problems that we face in the court is people not appearing. That's actually a huge resource drain for us. A lot of those people just won't show up. And the hearings still end up being held to a degree, even if sometimes it's just to continue it or to put out a warrant. So we are a busy court. We also have 4 restraining orders set for next week. And I wish I could remember the numbers. I joke all the time when I'm on the bench trying to total up fines or something because I'm an English major. And you just shouldn't trust an English major with numbers. We don't do it. So I think that's all I've got. Yeah, that's all I've got, but I would love questions. Are we ready to do questions? Oh, okay.
So we got Sarah to go next, and then we're going to take a quick break so we can stretch our legs, grab another snack, and then we'll come back and berate them or just pummel them with questions.
Thanks, colleague.
You're welcome. Anytime.
All right, so I'm Sarah Gray, and I direct the Master's of Public Administration program at the University of Montana. And I'm going to talk about the 4th branch of government, where all the action happens. So we always talk about the 3 branches of government. So even though the bureaucracy is under the executive, this is where all the policy making is carried out. And so 90% of policy in the United States is carried out through the bureaucracy. So everyone's like, what? What do you mean? Oh, I'm supposed to stand over here, aren't I? Sorry. It doesn't matter? Okay. All right, so public administration is just the fancy academic term for the bureaucracy. So I think public administration is probably a little bit nicer on the ears instead of saying bureaucracy. And so I want to talk a little bit about this. So what about common perceptions? When you hear the word bureaucrat, what comes to mind?
Red tape.
Red tape, slow, what else? I can see your helpful. See, yay! That's what we like to hear. What else? So usually lazy, incompetent, but we're moving past that, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But really what we do, my background's in political science, but I also was a policy analyst for a long time for the state of Ohio's Office of Budget and Economic Development. And so really thinking about when Congress passes that legislation that's very vague, think about why they do that, right? It's really easy to blame the nameless, faceless bureaucrat when the folks within the government agencies at the state, local, and federal level are really interpreting the law. And that interpretation becomes law, and so that's something that we forget. So what we study, what we're doing at the U, but what folks are doing, and I'll talk about the different roles, are really helping to provide solutions for public sector problems. So it's pretty fascinating and really good stuff. So
this you're probably used to, the hierarchy, so the structure of the organization. And so most agencies across the US, specifically within the federal level, are hierarchical. So top down, you have the executive, so someone that it might be a political appointee, or at the director level, they're providing directive to mid-level and frontline staff. But if you know, at the bottom of this, all the action happens at the bottom. And so we're seeing some really creative, interesting things coming out of city level government. State of Washington's doing some really interesting stuff too. So what can we be more creative in doing in terms of two-way communication? So what we're doing inside an organization, what can we do that's best serving the public? And so that's what's really awesome about what we get to do. So just a couple of quick things in terms of what we do. So if you look at that structure, you have the folks on the front lines. So like she was saying, we're actually very helpful. So if you think about social workers or teachers, I teach an undergraduate class on public administration, and I teach the grad level class, and so I always ask the undergrads, I'm like, why are you taking this class? They're like, oh, it's an elective. And then by the end of the semester, they're like, oh, well, you're a bureaucrat. You work for a state agency, the University of Montana. I'm like, yes, that's correct. And they're like, well, you're not boring and you're not lazy. So just thinking about where those common perceptions come from and thinking about the politics. And so we always think about ways in which the work that we do is about our expertise. And so one of the awesome things about public administration is it cross-discipline. So it's science, it's policy, it's looking at water pollution, and so you're really cutting across disciplines and saying, you know what, we're here to help you. And so this just kind of gives you a demonstration about all the different levels across different agencies and what we do at the state, local, and federal level. This just gives you a snapshot in terms of our workforce for the state of Montana. And looking at over time from the 1960s to 2016, so Governing Magazine is a really great data point to look at in terms of, everyone's like, oh, there's too many bureaucrats, but thinking about what we actually do on a day-to-day basis. And so 37% of this is we're focusing on education, and so that's what I get to do on a day-to-day basis.
Sarah, could you go back to
Yes.
that slide? Could
Yes.
you read that just a little bit for everybody?
So 37% of our state agencies is within the education realm, and then it's just broken down. So in terms of who's working in public welfare, the smaller percentage is coming out of police, and then corrections too. So the amount of individuals, so even though we might be spending a lot of money on per capita, so a lot of state prisons are moving towards privatization, and so spending less state dollars on that. So if you look in terms of what our taxpayer dollars are going towards, and who's actually implementing policy, the biggest percentage out of our state benefit is coming out of 37% for education. So the Montana University system, but also the K-12 system. So we're all under that bureaucratic umbrella. And so this gives you an idea of most of our jobs in the state are also, they're the bureaucracy. And so think about the economic driver for the state too that we often forget about. So this just gives you a broad brush in terms of the makeup, but I thought you'd be interested in what's going on in the state. Unfortunately, there's a federal shutdown for those of us that work for the federal government right now, and if you have questions about that later, I'm happy to talk about it. But just thinking about separating that politics from administration, I mean, one of the foundational principles of studying and practicing public administration is that using your expertise, but you're often riddled your day-to-day job with the politics and how you reconcile that. The last piece, which I think is most exciting about what we actually do, so one of the things we always talk about and we're scrutinized about is what is the one best way to provide services to the public. And so there's never always one best way, there's a collective different ways. So thinking about how we're rowing the ship, so in terms of providing our expertise and providing services to provide an efficient and effective government. The second piece too is that we're the ones that are actually interpreting the law and providing guidance. My area of expertise is actually in regulation. Everyone's like, what? So I look at compliance and regulation, so there's a completely different process for that too. But we're always taught that Congress passes the law and that's the final say, but federal agencies, state agencies have a rulemaking process, and so they interpret those. That's a very participatory process, so you can submit comments, you can attend public hearings, and so this is really where the rubber hits the road for policy making and a really great space for citizen participation. and agencies will interpret your feedback. They'll provide, comments back to you and say, hey, thank you so much for your feedback, we've listened to you, and we're gonna issue a new policy, and that becomes law. The last and most important piece is just citizen empowerment. And so think about your next door neighbor might work for the DMV or a school teacher or a social worker, just thinking about the impact that they have. And we talk about public service motivation. So you might not make the most money, or the benefits might be really great, but that public service motivation actually giving back to your community. So I think that's what's so exciting, that you guys are here today, because you care about your community and learning more ways to become involved. But just thinking about, I always think about Jessica Miller that works at the City of Missoula Mayor's office. She's the one that takes constituent complaints day in and day out. And so she's part of this bureaucratic apparatus about helping and empowering citizens to provide a voice where you might feel like you don't have access to elected officials. I think that's one thing that we're really fortunate in the City of Missoula, because you do. But thinking about in larger states, in Montana, you could call the governor's office and he'd call you back tomorrow. I grew up in Ohio. You couldn't necessarily do that, even though I'm from a really rural community. But just thinking about that access that we have in Montana to not only elected officials, but also non-elected officials. And that's really a space that can empower citizens to become involved and to participate in that process like you guys are doing today. I think the most important piece is the future, and so I have the honor and privilege to work with amazing students at the University of Montana. Our Masters of Public Administration program focuses on policy and public administration, and we have students, the Attorney General just graduated from a program this summer, so thinking about when you have folks at the top, the middle, or even pre-career students, just thinking about ways to, we have classes on human resource management or policy analysis or budgeting and finance. And so how can you become engaged but also enhance your education to provide more creative and effective solutions for public sector problems? So we think that's pretty exciting. So there isn't one best way. There's a variety of different ways. And this is our public administration and policy family at the U. And I brought stickers today to share with everyone. If anyone wants one, so there are, I love bureaucracy stickers. Yeah. So, but that's all that I have. But thanks for having us tonight too. So if anyone's stickers, they're here.
Can I have just a couple minutes to go over the?
Oh, did you get some facts?
Slide.
Okay.
I have it in an email proving that I did in fact submit it. So let's see, the other one was how many hearings we do during the course of a week. We have for next week scheduled 31 trials, 138 pretrial hearings, 15 post-trial hearings, so those are hearings on compliance issues, so revocation hearings, essentially, and 28 changes of plea. And then in addition to those, we've got 4 restraining orders. And then we have 16 hours available to the public to walk in and be seen on mostly traffic, or for the public to come in to be seen on an initial appearance for the, or a more serious charge if there is one. So we are busy. We do keep 2 courtrooms running full-time, and we, in the last 7 years since I've been there, we've eliminated a lot of the waiting, but there is still a lot of waiting when you want to come in. So I just wanted to get that last. I hunted those numbers down and I counted them out.
Well, thank you, Judge James. All right, we're going to have 5 minutes. Use the restrooms, which are just down the hall, in case you've never been here before. And on the way, or on the way back rather, there's some snacks. So we'll see you back here in about just a few minutes. Well, thank you all for sticking around. We are now going into our next section here of the wonderful Q&A. Now, there was one person that came tonight that has not spoken a word other than introducing himself. Dale, was there anything you were going to contribute to this great conversation?
No, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so just so you know, Dale's role behind the scenes is that he really tries to make sure that financially our government is sound. That's his primary job. So if you have questions about the budget, he's going to be coming forward and he'll answer those. So with that, who has the very first question? Gold star to Larry. Okay.
Not really a question, but Brian, I'm glad you are somewhat concerned about the social media thing, because I believe that a lot of retirees, older people, are disenfranchised in this community. We need to find a better way to communicate with them, and going to social media will make it worse for them.
And Brian, can you stand up just so that and see you?
It's a great point. If you have ideas, I'm all ears. So, not necessarily now. Yeah.
Brian, I had a question for you. You mentioned something about being against the statute to bring forth anything about an optional sales tax.
Yeah.
Could you explain that a little?
Sure. So what I meant by that is there's existing Montana state law that for a local option tax, but it's limited. The way it's written is communities. The only communities that can utilize that tool, they have to be under 5,500 people, if I'm remembering that right. I think it's 55. Yeah. Under 5,500 people in population. And so there's a handful of communities in the state who have done this. Whitefish is the one I mentioned. There are some others. It's you know, some folks and in some places you'll see it called the resort tax. But communities bigger than that, and actually Whitefish is bigger than that now, but they're sort of grandfathered in as I understand it. But communities that have population higher than that, like ourselves obviously, we're prevented by statute from being able to do that. So one thing that has been discussed, that's a very straightforward sort of approach is, hey, this is a good tool. We have evidence of communities utilizing this tool in the state. Whitefish has been doing it for years. Let's keep this tool. The tax is limited to 3%. Just yell at me if I get any of this wrong. It's limited to 3%, and it's a very limited range of things that it could be on. So typically, the non-controversial parts of this are, it's something that could be applied to hotel stays. You know, it's a room tax. It can be done on car rentals. I think liquor by the glass. Whitefish had an interesting thing. We had the city manager from Whitefish come down and give us a detailed talk about it, and he was mentioning ski clothing. It's actually one of the things, because they wanted to capture some of the revenue from, you know, the resorts and the folks that, you know, it's a lot of big ticket items. So there's a bucket of things that are fairly limited. This is not a general sales tax, unlike where you're going to be going to the grocery store or whatever, and every item you purchase. But it's a suite of things, and then the community is enabled to look at that basket basically and say, we're proposing a local option tax on these things at this rate, and the money will be used this way. This amount for property tax could be 25%, could be 50%, you know, could be whatever. There could be, you know, Whitefish has used a lot of that money for road infrastructure. So roads, there's been some, I think, some park work. You know, a lot of it it's a great tool for some of those basic infrastructure pieces. Does that help?
I'm going to ask now a follow-up. John, I think in the past you've talked about how many billions of dollars come in from those tourist dollars and what it would equate to. Do you remember what that figure was?
Yeah, well, ballpark numbers, if we were to do a tax on the items Brian mentioned, excuse me, a couple $1 million, Dale?
Well, I think, if it's broad, you know, liquor by the glass, all those combinations, it's something like $8 million annually to the city would budget that, you know, you would use like that and use more property tax reduction.
And that's $8 million on our general fund of roughly $58 million.
Yeah, our general fund, property tax base in the general fund is like around 30 million. So it's really it's a significant portion.
And I think part of the, maybe this is what you're saying, why is it important that we have this discussion about a resort tax?
I mean, there's several reasons. One of the reasons is we're statutorily limited. We're limited to property taxes. We're statutorily limited also in state law to this half the rate of inflation. It's a complicated mechanism, and it's a little more nuanced than that. Districts are not in that cap, as you hear. But a half the rate of inflation sort of increase, I mean, you run off a cliff eventually. The vast majority of the city budget is police and fire, and that's primarily the salaries of those people. And they get into public works and parks, you know, the main sort of constituent parts. And so it's not just Missoula that's facing this sort of issue. Every community in the state is facing this. We might be at different points sort of in the trajectory of facing this issue, but we're all facing it. Dale, the mayor, can talk to it well. So it's a revenue tool, and it's under the umbrella of what I would call, you know, tax reform. I mean, the state has a bigger issue than me focusing specifically on local option tax. The state has a tax code structured for an economy that existed 50 years ago. And we have to wrestle with that as a state and move past it. And I think giving local communities, I'm an advocate for giving local communities that option. I love the fact that part of the requirement is the local community, whether at the city or the county level, has to vote this in. So if we brought it to you and it was bad, well, it's democracy in action. It won't get voted in.
Carol, did you have a
So I
follow-up?
just had one follow-up question. So if it's a state statute that the cities can't do that, can the citizens of the community vote it in, even though there's a state statute, or would we have to change the state
State
statute?
statute has to be changed. And I think, you know, there have been multiple attempts to change it or replace it with a different statute. I think there are 2 active bills that I'm aware of right now. One of them, if I'm getting this right, it's a pretty dynamic environment, obviously, in Helena. One of them, essentially, and I'm a fan of this approach, it's the simplest in my mind. It just eliminates that population cap. And then there's a second part of the tourism, of the local option tax, where you're supposed to justify a proportion of the economic activity within the jurisdiction as relating to tourism. I would simply just strike both of those. And a lot of people do that. The other one is a little different. The 3%, I think, number is different. There's different aspects to it. It wouldn't be shocking at all, and maybe this is where we're headed to see this come via initiative to the voters of the state.
Blaine, I think you were next.
I do, thank you. I'm curious if you got any insight from Whitefish about the administrative costs to businesses to implement, and then also the dollars that actually ended up going directly to the town, less, I guess, the cost of administering at the, city level.
Yeah, we did see really detailed numbers of that. I may punt a bit to Dale. I don't remember, what they were. It is, there is, there's work that has to be done there. But it wasn't, my takeaway, and again, I'll defer to Dale, was it's something new. You gotta get, up and running, get everyone, gotta get it implemented. But then, overwhelmingly, you were seeing dollars go to, it was low to maintain.
So about in 2016, about $6 million to the general fund in Whitefish. A portion of the proceeds go to reimburse businesses for collections and administrative costs. And then the city of Whitefish has a 25% property tax relief component to their local option.
Danny.
What entities are opposed to the local option sales tax, and what are their arguments?
I'll pop up. So here, I will try to make this as brief as possible. Statewide general sales tax has been debated by the Montana legislature relentlessly over the decades. Statewide sales tax has failed to pass muster with a referendum, and the arguments are these: if you're a Democrat, which I happen to be, you believe that sales taxes are regressive and that lower income people pay a disproportionate share, they have a disproportionate burden. I don't disagree with that. However, if you look at our property tax system today, lower income people are already burdened, and this is new money, and you can do some things through policy to compensate for that problem with proportionality. If you're a Republican, you want a statewide sales tax all day long, generally speaking, and the notion of a local option tax erodes your support in the legislature for a statewide sales tax. So if Missoula's got it and Billings has got it, those legislators don't care about a statewide sales tax because their constituents have been taken care of. So that's the tension at the state level that's gone on for decades. The two bills that are in front of the legislature today, if I were a betting man, I would bet that they're DOA, which is why I think the notion of taking this to the voters and making the case to voters rather than dealing with those tensions between that are today actually probably less DNR and more rural and urban.
Yeah, on the rural urban aspect of it, you know, if you live outside of the city and you come in, you're going to be seeing, and you stay in a hotel or something, or you rent a car, or you travel for, say, a softball tournament, you're going to see some costs. I think there's a great argument that those are completely legitimate costs to be paying to support the infrastructure you're using when you go to those places. But that's some of the tension.
And we're talking about a 3% tourist tax. It's not an 18, it's not a 20% VAT tax that our European brethren and sisters end up paying instead. So it's a very modest amount. And yet I think there's this fear among folks that when we start talking about adding another tax, we're adding another tax to already growing folks. What it really is just trying to level the playing field. People who come here to visit want to pay for the visit here. I mean, it's universal, and I'm sure you talk to folks who come here all the time. And when you think about your travels out of state, do you even think twice about the tax that you're going to pay for the hotel that you stay at? You might look at it and like grumble about it, but it doesn't prevent you from going to that destination.
It's new money. That's the issue. It's new money.
It's new money, and it's not you and I paying it anymore. Yes?
I realize that this academy is focused on the city, but I just had a question about the different roles the city has compared to the county and how you guys kind of work together. I think that might be a...
So the city does all the stuff?
Right.
So there is a boundary, right? And that boundary is the city limits.
Yeah.
And within the city limits, we have jurisdiction and provision of services, right? County is an extension of state government, so administers a number of state programs. You need a license for your car, for example, clerk and recorder. The justice court course of record happen in counties, and we are lucky. We have good relationships with the 3 county commissioners. That is not universal in the state. We meet regularly. We have thoughtful conversations, and we try to work cooperatively wherever we can.
Yeah, commissioners, whereas we have a very clear split, executive branch, legislative branch, they serve both roles as executive branch and legislative branch there. But I would echo the mayor's comments. Dave Strohmeyer, who's obviously one of the commissioners, held the council seat for multiple terms that I actually then ran for right after Dave left. So there's good folks there.
Toffer.
As far as us, and maybe each of us has like an issue that we care about or several issues that we care about, and I don't know, I guess maybe each of you might have your own perspective on the best channel to go through. But I mean, is what would you recommend as far as neighborhood councils, or contacting you directly, or contacting the school superintendent? I mean, like, if you have an issue, what do you think is the best way to try to affect change in that area in Missoula? I mean, I guess it could matter if it was, we could talk about specifics, but just generally.
So most people don't ask that question, they just call my office. Which is actually okay. I mean, that's part of our service, is sort of directing people in the most effective way to get their questions resolved or their answered or resolved. We generally don't do schools, right? That's a separate jurisdiction, separate form of government. But, you know, I always encourage, talk to your elected officials, whether it's your ward rep, you're welcome to call my office. Turns out we return calls. Jessica Miller in my office, as Sarah had mentioned, she fields calls, and what we try to do is make it as easy for you. You don't have to understand the system, you just have to understand that Jessica understands the system, and we make those connections. Broad issues, policy issues tend to be conversations that go beyond the quick fix of the pothole or the noisy neighbor or the barking dog or the couch in the boulevard. And you're always welcome to contact my office. Sometimes it's just not our deal, but we try to figure out a way to get your questions answered.
And I'll plug for the ward reps.
I'm gonna have Gwen chime in.
The ward reps then just call my office.
I would add that I think most city councilors, yes, we set policy, we have high-level debate. We also do a huge amount of time answering emails and telephone calls from our constituents. And sometimes it's just a question of who they should be forwarded onto within the city. And sometimes I send them to Jessica, sometimes I know where else to send them. A lot of times it's education. They have a question regarding an issue, and I mean, this is like my record, but I think I had a 7-page email I sent to a constituent who doesn't like to talk by the phone and doesn't want to meet. Which is fine, and I like that. It helps me organize my thoughts. It was a complicated issue also, but we do a lot of education and communication, and I see city councilors as a big part of our job as being conduits of information. And frankly, the first priority is to clearly and correctly communicate that information. And then if there is a point or an argument we want to make about it, sometimes we discuss that with the constituent, but that's, I mean, I know Brian and Heather, you guys, it's hours every week.
They do a ton of constituent service.
Even
And
just
the
like
mayor-
sit in a class too, like come and sit in the classes and understand how it works. Just email me and say,
All right.
come and sit in your class for free.
So we're gonna go Larry, Megan, Casey.
Property taxes. Seniors living on fixed incomes. We have a, I don't know what you call it, ordinance or whatever, which I think is set at 45,000. You can get some relief on your property taxes. Cost of living continues to go up. Do you see any possibility of amending that to raise that limit?
So I'm pretty confident that's at the state level or the property tax relief kicks in.
It is. So property tax and the tax burden and the tax responsibility, enormously challenging issue for us, and it's all about service provision and our ability, as our costs increase, to maintain a level of service that citizens expect, while trying to find that balance of not taxing anyone out of their homes. And we do have some statutory relief around that. But that's why we're looking at these new revenue sources, because, you know, we may have a statutory limit with regard to what we can tax, but there is a political limit as well. There is a point at which folks just will not pay anymore. And when we get to that point, we're gonna have big trouble in the community. So we're always trying to find that balance where we're.
I don't know if you'll have any trouble or not, because the seniors get outvoted.
Well, seniors are pretty good voters, in my experience. And I'm getting closer to being one.
And more and more of our people live in apartments, they don't own property.
That's true.
That specific limit, just to be clear, that specific limit you're talking about where the property tax relief is set at state level. It's a good conversation to have with your
Is that-
state. It's not a city
That
ordinance.
rule about limiting property taxes at 40, to somebody less than 45,000 income,
State.
is that a state?
That's a state level.
Yeah, not a city ordinance. So.
Christine, I see your hand, but.
Yeah.
Okay, so Megan, you're up next.
So I know it's kind of a hot button thing right now, but there's been a lot of conversation about affordable housing and addressing affordable housing in Missoula. And I think that one of the components of that, and obviously it's very multifaceted, is home starts, and that we're behind in new builds because we're not creating enough houses to make up for the demand in new folks moving into the community and our community as it grows. So I guess it's kind of a many fringe question, but one of the things that I have seen quite a bit of is there's a ton of frustration with the permitting process and the length of time that permits are taking to be processed. And I think right now there's a backlog in permitting because you've just had a couple of people leaving permits.
We've had 3 retirements, which are a big deal because these were folks with tremendous experience. So a couple of things that we've done. One is a number of years ago now, we blew up our zoning code because we were hearing over and over again that the zoning code was convoluted, out of date, unpredictable. We reorganized our planning and permitting office to facilitate development and get rid of some of the unpredictability there. And we're continuing to refine those processes today. And in fact, we're in the process of having the consultant who helped us reorganize to ensure the development could happen more effectively. We're having them come back and look at our system. I am not aware of backlogs, but I am more than happy if someone wants to give me a yell, we're happy to look at that. One of the things I heard most recently from a developer who's doing work in Billings and Bozeman is that our permitting process is head and shoulders above those 2 communities, which actually surprised me. I don't know who mentioned Billings, but yeah, so based on the look of Billings, it looks like the development process is pretty easy. But we're always trying to get better, and that is certainly an impediment that we've heard over and over.
So I guess the question is, what's the next step? Like, how do we make that better, and how do we streamline getting housing started in Missoula? Sorry, that's a huge question, but to try to meet that demand.
All right, so we're coming now near the end of a 2-year process. Just had a briefing on this today from Aaron Pahan, who is our housing director. And we're proposing to revamp regulations to create more opportunity for a variety of housing types. We're looking at our ability through municipal government to help fund and provide incentives for more affordable housing and more housing in general. We continue to look at ways through our development services office to use processes that other communities have done. At some point, I'm going to have a conversation with council about what are called form-based codes. It's probably the cleanest and probably most flexible way to get from a building idea to a built structure. So all that stuff is in the works. I think the suite of policies around affordable housing will be helpful. We're in what I call a slow emergency rather than a crisis, and we are fortunate or not fortunate, depending on the way you look at it. We're not alone in this. Successful cities around the nation, and particularly in the West, are suffering from a lack of housing in general and affordable housing in particular, but we're on it.
The suite of policies the mayor just mentioned are, as you said, are all coming in front of council. We just had an update in December from Aaron in the Office of Housing and Community Development. So I know all of council is expecting that we'll be wrestling with these and expecting a big public conversation around them pretty imminently here for the next couple months at least.
And I think one of the other things, as a community, we have relied upon the market to take care of our housing. But we've gotten to a point where we are in a slow emergency. And now the onus has been shifted to government to pick up and solve it. Government purposefully moves slowly so that we have a process that is completely public, so that we're not doing things behind closed doors and in secrecy. That is key. And so I know there's some frustration that it moves so slowly, but there is good reason, and I think Sarah would attest to it. You got to have that process. Casey, you're up.
Judge Jenks, you've had a lengthy career in criminal practice before you were on the bench. I'd like to hear how you think crime has changed in our community as you.
Well, I think that's really, unfortunately, an easy answer. Right now, meth is huge. We have had such a influx in meth cases. You know, our court doesn't handle actual meth possession, but we do paraphernalia tickets, you know, which is the possession of needles or spoons or something. But even the cases that aren't charged as a drug case, they all got meth involved in them, right? And of course, I'm exaggerating. They don't all have meth, but you know, it is huge right now. It's a huge problem, and so that's changed a lot. We see heroin now, which has changed a lot. I practiced law for going on 30 years, and I think as far as just the number of cases and just the overwhelming, it's in every case, there's just a strain everywhere. It's not this big. So.
Christine, you're up.
We've been talking about the resort tax revenue, and as you obviously, some council members know, I am in support of that. But I'm wondering, and was sitting here wondering as you both were talking, Brian and Marion, you did reference other revenue sources. And in my mind, I was processing what other opportunities we have or elements that maybe those of us that live in the city and even work in the city still really haven't heard that you might be just looking at and thinking about and that other cities are doing that are creative or innovative?
Well, we've largely tapped the source, right, in terms of new revenue. So whenever possible, we do cost recovery, right? So building, you know, the building industry, we're trying to get folks who are building stuff to generally cover the costs of administering the rules and regulations around that. Our impact fees, which have been in place for since early 2000s, those are designed to help mitigate the impact of new development. We don't recover those costs there is a justifiable and defensible rate for recovering those costs. We don't charge that rate because we still want development to happen, particularly in the arena of affordable housing. We do some cost recovery around parks and recreation. We attempt to do some cost recovery in courts. We have user fees in some cases, but there just aren't that many options, right? Local income tax would be interesting and a good way to get drawn and quartered if you're the mayor, but there are statutory hurdles to that. So really, in terms of trying to find new revenues, it's largely about looking elsewhere or having the state restructure its entire system to reflect
what's currently
to better reflect income, wealth, extraction, right? The legislature today will be considering all manner of bills, one of which is in order for the state to get more money to do the services, to provide the services that they're in some cases constitutionally required to provide, they're going to ask for a supermajority to get that done. Well, hell, it's tough enough to get a majority, right? Get a supermajority and they're out of the business of reality, right? City of Missoula, we don't have the luxury of deficit spending. We don't do it.
Right.
I'm required by Constitution and Charter to deliver a balanced budget, which means we do have debt, but that debt is covered on an annual basis and retired. We don't do deficit spending. And what we've seen at the national level is this myth. You can have it all. You can have low taxes or no taxes in some cases, but you can have the mightiest military on the planet, and you can have a wall, and you can have right? You can have all that stuff. Well, it's a myth, right? It's funny money. We don't get away with it here. I'm glad.
Thank you. So Christine, and on that, what other sources are there to go to? What other sources of revenue? I had an economist tell me this fall that the best kind of taxes are taxes on other people. So Michigan taxes automobiles. Nevada taxes gambling because they're selling automobiles to people out of state. Gambling, it's people out of state coming in and gambling. So we're doing a really good job of taxing ourselves, but we need to figure out who is them and how do we tax them. And I think the most constructive idea so far has been the local option tourist tax.
Yeah,
but it's a long ways down the road.
I'll add more optimism. It is clearly the source, the idea for new. But the other thing that I think is worth mentioning is, other stuff that city runs a sewer system. Missoula sewer rates are among, if not the lowest in the state. One great example of what's at work there, and this is not new revenue, it's cost containment or cost mitigation aspects, is hopefully if you've driven out that way, you see a gigantic poplar plantation. So one of the things that we're wrestling with is there's more and more stringent requirements, which is appropriate, about the phosphorus and nitrogen that gets put into the Clark Fork River. I'm glad to see that evolution, that regulatory evolution, but it costs money and it takes things to meet those requirements. In our case, due to some really innovative thinking from folks in the community, one in particular who's no longer with us, we have a poplar plantation where effluent goes out from treatment, gets absorbed, you get a lot of phosphorus and nitrogen taken up there, and it's reduced what we put into the river, and from a dollars and cents standpoint, that has, we have avoided capital investment or delayed capital investment that would come back in sewer rates to you by virtue of those sorts of things. We also recapture, one of the first things I was involved with before you got council was actually helping write our climate action plan for the city. It gave me an exposure to council, and we have a methane recovery out at the wastewater treatment plant, and now that methane recovery system is powering a huge portion of the electricity demand at the site. So where we can be innovative of reducing our costs or delaying capital investments, that you see that in what you pay or don't pay as well.
All right, so we have Brett, Elena, and Sarah. You're up.
Megan and everyone else, I just wanted to mention that on the second Monday in February, I believe it's the 11th, City Club Missoula will have a forum on housing and affordability in the community. I believe Aaron from the Office of Housing will make an announcement, a more official announcement about what their strategy plan is, and some other organizations will be talking about it. And city clubs, kind of like this, except it's less exclusive and costs more. But
What was that again? Sorry.
City Club Missoula on the 11th has a forum on
February 11th?
February 11th.
And that's over at the Double Tree.
Double Tree.
At 11:30 to 1 o'clock. All right, Elena.
Yeah, you kind of set me up, Brian, on when you were talking about innovation. I have, I guess, a two-part question. One, what do you think that we do as the city of Missoula that other cities around the country could learn from? And what things are going on in other cities that excite you the most to try here? This is kind of for anyone.
So we do a number of things pretty well. One of which is public process. We haven't always been good at it, but we've gotten a lot better at it over the course of the years, which is why we have the foundational documents around planning and growth that we have today. We have a transportation plan that had extraordinary public input. We have a growth policy that had extraordinary public input. We have a zoning code that had extraordinary public input. We've got a downtown master plan update that's in process now that's getting a ton of public input. And it turns out one of our planning directors years ago once said that if you are not doing things with people, they think that you're doing them to them. And so we work with our partners to try to get as many voices at the table so that we have support as we move forward. When we do planning in a vacuum, we end up with a product that doesn't work particularly well. And so the reason I think we're experiencing some of the growth that we're experiencing today and some of the confidence that businesses have in investing in Missoula is a product of those planning processes and the guidelines we have on the ground today.
I mentioned three just sort of down in the weeds things, but one, the mayor mentioned transportation, and you'll hear people talk about mode shift, mode split, and such things. Missoula is off the charts nationally relative to what we have here in terms of biking and pedestrian use compared to other cities. So we have very aggressive plans going forward. We've had aggressive plans. Our complete streets policy is nationally recognized. So Missoula's a leader in that area, and but it's a really tough thing to stay on and keep pushing forward. I mentioned our climate action plan. I'm really interested in energy and climate and how it affects local communities. I'm constantly looking to see what other communities, because in the absence of federal leadership on these issues, you're seeing cities, rise to the challenge and do things that are innovative and approach things in different ways, and et cetera. So I spent a fair bit of time, and I know that is something that multiple council members have an interest in. And a last thing that may sound a little bit odd, but we played a role in putting 2 questions on the ballot, both of which passed with 63% open space. But there was an open space bond and there was an open space mill levy. And I mention it because I think you're going to see that followed by other communities as well. It has happened in other places, but when there were discussions about coming to the community for another open space bond, I know from my standpoint on council and a lot of my colleagues, it's easy and kind of sexy and fun to purchase, make the acquisitions, to have the bond money to do the acquisitions. The harder part is in the annual maintenance and stewardship of those places. And what came out of a lot of difficult negotiations was a package, essentially. There were 2 separate questions on the ballot, but one was a modest size open space bond and then the mill levy. And I would argue, and I did argue, in support of putting those questions out to the public. Council has some role in that. Obviously, the general obligation bond is a countywide measure, and the commissioners put that on. But we passed a resolution in support of doing that. But I think that combination is something that you're going to see other communities look at as well. And I'm proud that we worked through those difficult discussions and put that question out to the voters, because it sucks to have the money to do the acquisitions and feel pinched under the stewardship.
And I think just to kind of echo along those lines, when you think of the things that you own, whether it's your car, it's your home, those are what we call assets. And in city government, it's similar. This building in which we're sitting right now, but also our open spaces are assets. And that stewardship bond that Brian was talking about, or that mill levy, is precisely that. We can own things and we can watch them degrade, or we can actually step up our game and be good stewards.
So there was a second part of the question I won't
Yes.
dodge it.
Thank you.
There are about 1,000 people in the city of Missoula tonight who don't have a stable home. They would call themselves homeless, and that may mean they're sleeping on the street or in a car or in an RV, or they're crashing on somebody's couch. Their bellies aren't full, they may be sick, they might be mentally ill, and they may be addicted, and we don't do enough to take care of those souls. And there are cities who are doing it better than we are, and so we're trying to steal ideas from them.
And can I add that whenever we're working on legislation or tweaking something or trying to spearhead something, it's a common practice to look at what other cities in Montana or in the region have done. What are the best practices out there? Are those best practices a good fit for what we have in Missoula? So it's I think there's always a wide net cast depending on what question's being asked, so it's part of the conversation.
All right, Sarah. And we may have touched on this for some of you, but just kind of to everyone on the panel and anybody, in the context of your position and the city, what keeps you up at night?
Everything.
Not so much, yeah, personal, but.
What disturbs my sleep are those intractable problems, right? How do we solve for homelessness? How do we solve for addiction? How do we solve for hunger? How do we solve for poverty? How do we solve for those fundamentally challenging human questions that that we're remiss if we don't at least try, right? The instinct is to throw your hands up and say we can't fix it, but in practice we do stuff, right? The 10-year plan to end homelessness, 10 years is aspirational, but when we aspire, often we achieve. We get somewhere, and somewhere is better than nowhere. The little stuff that keeps me up at night are the 500 or more souls who we all rely on to do their jobs, some of whom are in harm's way every day. And you know, I dread the phone call, right?
I was thinking, if you'd asked me, depends on what month you ask
Right.
that question.
Yeah.
At a more general level, and to kind of go back to a point that I was trying to make, or at least raise, relative to the social media issue I brought up. In more than one or more than 100 conversations, I've mentioned to folks that, and I didn't coin the phrase, that we're kind of living through or in the middle of what people call the sort of the post-truth environment. And I lose sleep over that every night. It's, you know, the social media, there are manifestations of it, but truth and honesty and integrity are a vitally important currency. And when they're not respected and when the behaviors associated with those are not modeled at every level of government and throughout, throughout all the sectors, we as a society have a real serious problem. And I would argue that we're living a big experiment in that right now. And it's concerning.
Also, a burrito after 9 o'clock.
Well, I would kind of piggyback on the mayor, maybe I just agree, but what keeps me up at night is wondering where the people that I saw during the day are sleeping when it's 10 degrees out. And truly, that wakes me up at night. And we see the same people over and over again. And, you know, they're homeless, they're addicted, they're mentally ill. And we get to know them quite well at court. And I know that they don't have anywhere to go. And as I watch the thermometer go down this time of year, you know, and yeah, that definitely keeps me awake at night.
Trying to find the boots to give people so they can pull themselves up by the bootstraps. I think we have one more. You're okay? All right. So we are at 9:02, and at this moment, I think the mayor is just going to fall asleep. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We most very much